Have you ever heard the expression that absolute power corrupts absolutely? Never had this saying been any more true than on the African continent. Let's face it, Africa is a rich land, but unfortunately, a lot of its inhabitants live in abject poverty, often because of the greed and corruption of some of its apathetic leaders. In recent African history, no one has come to symbolize the corruption that's been gripping the continent more than Mobutu Sese Seko, the former dictator of the Congo, formerly known as Zaire. In this video, we're gonna examine how Mobutu Sese Seko became the most corrupt African leader, and how his legacy kept the Congo, probably Africa's richest land, in the Bronze Age. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and click on the notification bell to get all of our videos. Mobutu Sese Seko Désiré was a Congolese politician and military figure who led the Democratic Republic of the Congo from 1965 to 1971 before becoming president of Zaire from 1971 to 1997. Joseph Désiré was born on October 14, 1930. His mother entrusted the care of her family to the Banga paternal clan after the death of his cook and domestic helper father in 1938. Young Mobutu adopted the Sese Seko of his title from his paternal uncle, a well-known warrior diviner from the village of Badalite. Instead of Lisala, Mobutu believes Badalite to be his ancestral village. During his reign, he transformed it into a model neighborhood with an opulent presidential palace that he frequently used as a royal retreat. In his later years, Mobutu frequently spoke of his difficult upbringing as the son of a cook. He had just finished the 4th grade when his father passed away. As his mother relocated the family to various villages over the ensuing 10 years, young Mobutu spent these years in and out of school. At Badalite, he clashed with one of his paternal uncles over his desire to compel Mama Yemo, Mobutu's mother, into marriage. In 1948, Mobutu was permitted to enroll in Mbandaka's junior high school. He frequently encountered disciplinary problems at the various Catholic missionary schools he attended, including the Capuchins, Jesuits, and Frères d'École Chrétiens. Mobutu began his military career in the Belgian Congo's Force Publique in 1949, rising from a clerk to a sergeant major, the highest rank at the time open to Africans. Mobutu received his education in missionary schools. While he was still in the army, Mobutu contributed to neighborhood newspapers in then Leopoldville, now known as Kinshasa. He began his career as a reporter for the daily L'Avenir, The Future, after being discharged from the military in 1956 before taking the helm as editor of the weekly Actualité Africaine. In 1956, Mobutu began writing newspaper articles under the pseudonym de Banzi. Through his military and journalism careers, he got to know powerful European patrons like liberal Belgian editor Pierre Davischer and senior Belgian officer Colonel Marlier. He became well known among the new African elite in Kinshasa as well. His only disagreement was with the Catholic Church, which viewed him as an intelligent but promiscuous young man with poor morals. Mobutu harbored resentment for the church all of his life. He frequently sided with anti-clerical organizations while president and refused to perform a Catholic wedding with his wife. With a sizable group of Zaireans who were on display as examples of Belgian colonial success at the Brussels World Exposition, Mobutu visited Brussels in 1958. Upon his return to Brussels in 1959, he was successful in obtaining an apprenticeship with the colonial propaganda group Congo. With the help of this job, he was also able to continue his advanced studies in Brussels. In 1959 to 1960, Zaireans who wanted to get into politics worked hard to establish political networks. Mobutu joined the Congolese nationalist movement shortly after it was founded in 1958, thanks to Patrice Lumumba's introduction to him through his press connections. Mobutu represented Lumumba at the 1960 Brussels Roundtable Conference on Congo Independence, before Lumumba was freed from prison for his nationalist activities in the Congo. At the conference, Mobutu supported Lumumba's recommendations for the newly independent Congo, which called for a highly centralized government. By August 1960, tensions between Mobutu and Lumumba were at an all-time high. After a political crisis between the two leaders erupted, President Kasavubu used his constitutional authority to remove Prime Minister Lumumba from office. After refusing to accept his own termination, Lumumba then asked that Kasavubu be removed from the presidency. This political impasse was quickly resolved by the military, under the command of Colonel Mobutu. who launched his first coup on September 14, 1960. Mobutu announced that he would suspend all political institutions until December 31, 1960, immediately after taking office. When he came into power, he expelled all of Lumumba's invited diplomats and technicians from the Soviet Union and the Communist bloc, and then used his own power to appoint an interim government. After the coup, Lumumba lived in the nation's capital under UN protection. He eventually made an attempt to escape while being held without communication in order to join his supporters in Kisangani, but he was caught and given to his adversaries in the province of Katanga. Lumumba was killed there on his first day of captivity. CIA involvement and Mobutu's complicity have been alleged, despite the fact that no one has been found accountable for the death of Lumumba. This is because Mobutu oversaw the forces that captured Lumumba and gave him to his enemies. According to reports, Kasavubu ordered Lumumba's detention and eventual transfer to Lubumbashi in Shaba, then Katanga province, in response to this incident, where he ultimately perished. After his death, Mobutu elevated Patrice Lumumba to the status of national hero. Mobutu received support from the College of Commissioners, a group of commissioners that was primarily made up of recent college graduates, during his brief rule during the First Republic. Mobutu, a politician and soldier, had no interest in establishing a military dictatorship. He was primarily supported by the army, but he also had a sophisticated political network and was heavily involved in shaping government policy. He held power until a new parliament convened in August 1961, at which point Cyril Adula was chosen to lead the new administration. Kasavubu, the president, kept his position. At that time, 4 groups vying for control of the Congo: the civilians under Kasavubu, the northern provinces under Antoine Jizena, the Shambo and Katanga, and the separatists in Kasai under Albert Kalonji. With the exception of the Shambe, everyone was gathered by Adula, who ruled for 2 turbulent years to create the new government. In July 1946, President Kasavubu gave Shambe the chance to become prime minister and set up the Government of National Reconciliation. A new constitution that took effect on August 1st, 1964, established a presidential system with a federalist framework. The division of Congo into 21 provinces was made possible by a new constitutional amendment that allowed the creation of new provinces, and the new constitution formally recognized the federalist viewpoint. Elections were held in 1965 in March and April, but by the middle of the year, Shambe and Kasavubu were unable to come to an agreement. Once more intervening under Lieutenant Generals Mobutu's direction, the army overrode the 2 executive leaders. On November 24, 1965, Mobutu was granted full executive authority. In an effort to strengthen his hold on power, Mobutu changed the name of the Congo to Zaire in 1971, and his own name to Mobutu Sese Seko in 1972. He created the Popular Movement of the Revolution as the sole officially sanctioned political party in 1967. Mobutu insisted that his political ideology was neither left, nor right, nor even center, even though he established a government that was incredibly autocratic even by African standards at the time. He made an effort to purge the country of all signs of colonial cultural influence through his National Authenticity Program. Mobutu was surrounded by a pervasive cult of personality. Because he accumulated a sizable personal fortune through economic exploitation and corruption while in power, some have referred to his rule as a kleptocracy. He presided over a period of extensive human rights abuses. While he was in charge, the nation saw unchecked inflation, a ballooning debt, and significant currency devaluations. The United States, France, and Belgium offered Mobutu strong military, diplomatic, and financial support because they recognized him as a fierce opponent of communism in Francophone Africa. He also formed close ties with Israel, the Greek military junta, and the apartheid government in South Africa. Beginning in 1972, Mao Zedong of China began to support him, mostly due to his opposition to the Soviet Union, but also because Mao desired to unite Afro-Asian nations under his rule. The significant Chinese economic aid that poured into Zaire gave Mobutu more negotiating leverage with Western governments. Additionally, he was able to refer to himself as an anti-capitalist revolutionary and avoid asking the IMF for assistance. Early in his reign, Mobutu solidified his hold on power by assassinating potential rivals, successionists, coup plotters, and other enemies in front of the public. Numerous individuals were hanged in front of sizable crowds as a lesson. On May 30th, 1966, in front of 50,000 spectators, 4 members of the cabinet, the ministers of finance, defense, and mines, were executed, including the former prime minister, Evariste Kimba. The men were executed because it was alleged that they had been in contact with Major Pierre Efomi and Colonel Alphonse Bangala while plotting a coup. The executions, in Mobutu's view, were necessary to enforce regime discipline by providing a shocking example. A chief makes his decisions, and that's the end of the matter. In 1968, Pierre Mulele, Lumumba's Minister of Education, who later served as the rebel leader during the 1964 Simba Rebellion, was persuaded to leave his exile in Brazzaville because he believed he would be granted amnesty. However, he was killed and tortured by Mobutu's troops. Mulele was still alive when his limbs were amputated one at a time, his eyes were gorged out, and his genitalia were severed. Later, Mobutu renounced the use of torture and murder in favor of a new tactic, involving the bribery of political rivals. Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer is a saying he liked to use to describe his method of appeasing political adversaries. Mobutu's preferred method of ensuring that no one would pose a threat to his rule was frequently change the cabinet roster and play musical chairs with the members of his government. Another tactic was to imprison and occasionally torture political opponents before letting them go and elevating them to high positions. The most well-known example of this treatment is that of Jean Nguza Karl I. Bond, who was fired from his position as foreign minister in 1977 after being tortured. After a year in prison, Mobutu commuted his sentence to life in prison, released him, and then appointed him prime minister. Nguza left the country in 1981, but he later came back to assume the position of foreign minister in 1985. Previously, he had been Zaire's ambassador to the United States. In 1972, Mobutu made an unsuccessful bid to win the office of president for life. 1983 saw Mobutu advance to the rank of field marshal. He initially expelled European investors and nationalized companies with foreign ownership. He frequently appointed members of his family and close friends to run these companies, who then embezzled their funds. Due to the severe economic downturn this brought about, Mobutu was forced to try to entice back foreign investors in 1977. Katangan rebels based in Angola invaded Zaire in response to Mobutu's support for anti-MPLA rebels in 1977. France airlifted 1,500 Moroccan paratroopers into the country and put an end to Shaba I by defeating the rebels. The rebels attacked Zaire once more and in greater numbers during the Shaba II invasion in 1978. Mobutu was re-elected in one-candidate elections in 1977 and 1984. He spent most of his time accumulating his personal wealth, which in 1984 was estimated to be worth $5 billion and was mostly kept in Swiss banks. However, only a $3.4 million was discovered after his removal. By 1989, the government started to default on loans from Belgium because they were nearly equal to the country's total foreign debt. The dictator had a fleet of Mercedes-Benz vehicles that he used to travel between his numerous palaces, even though the nation's roads were deteriorating and many of his citizens were going hungry. The infrastructure was almost completely destroyed, and many government workers went months without receiving pay. Mobutu and his family received the majority of the funds, along with other prominent political and military figures. Only the Special Presidential Division, which was in charge of ensuring his physical security, received a regular or sufficient salary. Civil servants pretended to work while the state pretended to pay them, an expression that perfectly captured the depressing reality of the Congo. Another result of Mobutu's poor economic management, which was directly related to the way he and his associates siphoned off much of the country's wealth. Another result of Mobutu's poor economic management, which was directly related to the way he and his associates siphoned off much of the country's wealth, was rampant inflation. Because of the sharp decline in the real value of salaries, public employees of all stripes have fostered a culture of corruption and dishonesty. It is said that Marshal Mobutu rented a Concorde from Air France for his personal use, including family trips to Paris for shopping. He had the Badalite Airport constructed in his hometown of Badalites in order to meet the extended takeoff and landing requirements of the Concorde. Mobutu rented the Concorde FBTSD for several trips in 1989, including a trip to New York City from June 26th to July 5th for a speech at the UN, a trip to Paris on July 16th as President François Mitterrand's guest, a trip on September 19th for a flight from Paris to Badalite, and a second non-stop flight from Badalite to Marseille with the Zairean Youth Choir. Mobutu's rule is regarded as one of history's best examples of kleptocracy and nepotism. His plans to prepare his eldest son, Niwa, to succeed him as president were thwarted when Niwa passed away from AIDS in 1994. In the military and government, prominent positions were given to close relatives and members of the Ngbendu tribe. He ruled one of the longest dictatorial regimes in Africa while his people were living in poverty, by selling off his nation's abundant natural resources. He amassed a personal fortune that is thought to be worth over $5 billion. As a result, he is regarded as one of the most dishonest rulers in history, as well as a shining example of kleptocracy. In order to advance his career in international democracy, Mobutu maintained an anti-communist stance. He enacted a totalitarian regime that violated numerous human rights, and attempted to purge the country of all Belgian cultural influences. Additionally, he served as the center of one of the most well-known personality cults of the 20th century. He was known by such titles as Father of the Nation, Messiah, Guide of the Revolution, Helmsman, Founder, Savior of the People, and Supreme Combatant, and his likeness could be found in many public places. He also made a television appearance before the evening news, with a picture of himself coming down from the sky through the clouds. The 1996 documentary about the Formanali fight in Zaire in 1974 can be heard with dancers welcoming the fighters chanting Sese Seko, Sese Seko. Early in 1975, Mobutu was the only person whose name could be used in the media. All others were only identified by the positions they held. Mobutu was able to successfully take advantage of Cold War tensions in order to gain substantial support from Western countries like the United States and international organizations like the International Monetary Fund. In May 1990, as a result of the end of the Cold War, a change in international political landscape, as well as economic concerns and domestic unrest, Mobutu agreed to lift the ban on other political parties. Additionally, he established a traditional administration to prepare for the forthcoming elections, but he still held a sizable amount of power. Following riots in Kinshasa caused by unpaid soldiers, Mobutu formed a coalition government with opposition leaders, but he still plotted to maintain control over the security forces and important ministries. Due to partisan disagreements, two governments, one in support of Mobutu and the other against him, were set up in 1993. Members of the Union for Democracy and Social Progress, Laurent Monsengwo and Etienne Tshisekedi, were in charge of the anti-Mobutu government. The High Council of Republic Parliament of Transition was created in 1994 as a result of the two organizations' merger. The economy was still in a terrible state at the time. Mobutu appointed the proponent of free market reforms and austerity measures, Kengo Wa Dondo, as his prime minister. As Mobutu's health deteriorated, the Tutsis seized control of a sizable portion of eastern Zaire, while he was away receiving treatment in Europe. But as the Cold War came to an end, so did Western support for Mobutu, especially in light of allegations of widespread corruption and human rights abuses. Mobutu's hold on power deteriorated as a result of the US, Belgium, France, and the US ceasing to support the regime militarily and financially. Longtime rival of Mobutu, Kabila, began a military campaign to overthrow him in October 1996 from eastern Zaire as the social, political, and economic situation deteriorated. When the rebels moved closer to Zaire, Mobutu, who had been receiving medical attention abroad, came home with a promise to put an end to the uprising. Mobutu fled as his government fell, first going to Togo and then to Morocco. He spent most of his time in Rabat, Morocco. At the age of 66, he passed away there on September 7, 1997 from prostate cancer. Decades of corruption and mismanagement would send the Congo into a tailspin of conflicts and destruction that echo even today. Many people think the subsequent wars, famine, and loss of life are all the legacy of Mobutu Sese Seko's reign of terror and corruption. Do you think Mobutu is the most corrupt African leader in recent African history? Let us know what you think in the comments below.